Hi. I didn't want to talk about this at all. I really wanted to stay out of it, but then I saw how stupid this discourse was, and I decided that I needed to actually speak on it because I think I at least have a little bit of a unique perspective on it. Okay, so we are talking about the anti-theism discourse that was all over Twitter about a month ago. At least I think that's when it was happening, because I think it was happening around the time I got out of the hospital. But what I saw of it, the main portion of it I saw was from Xena and Poppy's video when that released, and I was moderating YouTube chat. And I think that came out like about a week or so later. I don't exactly remember. Time means nothing to me because I have been working so much. But we're still going to talk about it. All right? So, what is anti-theism? This, I think, is the crux of the actual discourse that we were having. Was what anti-theism is, right? And I want you to understand what I am working with when I talk about anti-theism. Anti-theism is somebody who is against the idea of religion from a moral or ethical framework. They think that the existence of religion is itself a moral wrong, and that the eradication of religion as a concept is a better world for people to live in, because they believe that religion is in and of itself harmful to people, and to eliminate that harm is better for people. This is what I mean when I say anti-theist. So anti-theist is not the same thing as atheist. I wouldn't say that all anti-theists are atheists. I guess I suppose that you could find somebody who's an anti-theist that's not an atheist, but generally speaking, anti-theists are atheists, but not all atheists are anti-theists, okay? So an atheist is someone who does not believe in the existence of God. An anti-theist is someone that believes that religion is a moral wrong that needs to be done away with. It is harmful, a moral harm to people. Here is the very secret Saige lore. I used to consider myself an anti-theist. Up until around 2020, I actually was a part of the kind of Reddit atheist, anti-theist, edgy atheist, community in circa 2014 to 2020 for a long time. I was actually even one of the founding members of the organization at my college that was for secular students. I am an atheist. Currently, still am, have been for pretty much my entire adult life, or a good portion of my young adult life. I'm an atheist. I do not believe in a higher power. I don't believe in any kind of supernatural things. Those are my beliefs. I am no longer an anti-theist, and I kind of want to give my perspective on what anti-theism is and why I don't kind of subscribe to that notion anymore. The first thing is that a lot of anti-theists have a lot of religious trauma, and I know because I do. I have religious trauma. I grew up in a ultra nationalist, authoritarian Christian homeschool co-op. Yes, I was homeschooled all the way until I graduated high school, from 4th grade on. And for a lot of it, I was in this co-op that was a Christian organization. And there was a lot of unironic shunning, even though you wouldn't have called it that. That's what it was. There was a lot of if you didn't subscribe to all of these honestly horrendous views about the world, you just lost your entire social support circle. You lost all of your educational support, because the idea was everyone took care of the education. It was almost like a commune in a way of education. Everyone pitched in to teach people, to teach kids. And I have a lot of trauma from that. It's really it really with my sense of self, really with my social abilities, really with my ability to be around other people, with a lot of my trust of people. It was bad. And I hate that I ever had to go through that. A lot of people have religious trauma. Not unlike that, a lot of anti-theists come from religious families and were traumatized by this. And I do not want to discount that, okay? I'm not saying this in any way to discredit any of that trauma that comes from that. But I do think that a lot of anti-theists react to that trauma by going hard in the anti-like religion, because they have seen firsthand some of the harm that can come from religion. And let's not sugarcoat it, okay? This harm is not like unique to religion, but some of the way that it manifests is unique to religious people in a lot of ways. And so I do think that it's kind of like, it kind of makes sense why a lot of anti-theists go towards that when they've been through that kind of an experience. It's a lot of why I went down that direction, because for one, I have a lot of like bitterness towards that type of religion. Even if I could be convinced of any kind of like other spiritual beliefs, I don't know that like with those hangups that I at this moment could be convinced to go towards Christianity out of that, just because of that. And I understand that tendency amongst people. I do, however, think that some of those tendencies that come from that trauma cause people to go really over the top with it. So that's where the rest of this comes in, okay? Because I was in these circles back in like 2015, 2016, 2017. I remember the times when all of this was happening. I was a frequent, avid watcher of the atheist experience, which is probably the one thing that like saved me from going down the alt-right pipeline, if I'm being honest, was that I was watching that and not watching like all of the other shitbags in the edgy atheist circles. But still, I was in those circles. I saw the kinds of like the ways that people interacted. And I gotta be honest with you, anti-theists are by and large why atheists have the reputation that we do. I'm just gonna say that, and you have to understand when I say that I'm coming at this from experience in these circles. Because whenever somebody thinks of like the atheist, right? The person that like doesn't believe in God, when you think of that stereotype, what comes to mind is an anti-theist, a person who wants to eradicate religion and believes that all religion is morally harmful, and believes that like anyone who believes religion is like believes in like a religious idea is like a horrible person, or they're irrational. Like that's the other one that I heard so much. And by the way, I'm not making any of this up. Not only was I in these circles, but I saw these arguments being made in Xena and Poppy's chat, like while I was moderating this video. So do not sit here and tell me that they're not, okay? I've seen this. Yeah, Netspace, that's why I actually tend to use the word secular a lot of the time. Whenever somebody like asks me about religion, I tend to use the word secular because I want to avoid the connotation that comes with atheists because of what came out of anti-theists. So here's the thing. The reputation that anti-theists are by and large like horrible people is wrong. I want to state that just perfectly like from the front, okay? Anti-theists are not by and large horrible people, nor are they by and large people who like hate religious people. I know a ton of anti-theists from my time when I was like in that circle, when I called myself an anti-theist. I know a ton of those people, and I know a lot of them who are not those types of people. And I know that that's the majority of people in the circle. The problem is much like a lot of religious organizations and a lot of like other like groups where you have people in those groups that are loud and they're upsetting and they have goals that are kind of antithetical to the overall goals of things, and they just are bitter and angry and just want like an excuse to hate the people they're mad at. Anti-theists have a lot of those in their groups, and that tends to be the reason why they have the reputation that they have, that they're horrible people. The problem is that I'm also kind of ideologically opposed to anti-theism at this point. And the reason for that is I just cannot accept the belief that religion is an overall wholly net negative conceptually. I can be convinced that religion as it exists now in the ways that it has functioned over time, at least in America, has presented in net negative ways, okay? That is true if you look at certain areas of the country and certain pieces of like time and history, and like, okay, I cannot like subscribe to the idea anymore that like religion is itself a moral wrong or a like a human flaw that is so bad that it needs to be like gotten rid of. Yeah, Holic Masters. So that was one of the things that like this was why the group that I started or helped start, I didn't start it, but like I was part of the founding of in college. This was like the group, the reason why that group existed was to provide like support, like a support group and like a community for people who didn't have that anymore, like after they had left their like religious institutions and didn't have that same like social support. Those kinds of things are what we should be doing if we like really care about some of the flaws, or care about like people who you know maybe don't have those like religious or spiritual beliefs. But like a lot of people in anti-theist circles really do believe that religion itself is like hugely harmful, and they don't see any benefit to it. Even though, like you pointed out, there are plenty of them. You have community benefits, you can have friends, you have social support, you have emotional support, financial support. There are tons of like things that religion provides to people on a day-to-day basis that without that, there's a hole in their life. And of course, there are secular alternatives to, but because there are secular alternatives doesn't mean that the existence of those groups as they like exist are inherently harmful. In fact, it kind of implies the opposite in a way, because it kind of shows that there are implicit benefits to them. Legit question, because I was raised very religious, so I never ran with these groups, but why do so many militant atheists and these like weird libertarian? Good question. That was another thing. One of the things that kind of pushed me out of this was a lot of the militant like atheist types did end up like falling to the right. And that's the other point that I saw people bringing up a lot of the times was, how is, you know, you will say like, explain to me how religion is itself inherently harmful. And the thing that I remember being said a lot back then is that our beliefs inform our actions, and harmful beliefs and harmful ways of thinking will produce harmful like actions and harmful results. And that is something that in theory is true. The problem is when you apply it to religion on a whole, it just doesn't shake out. People go to those beliefs without religion. Like there are atheists and there are anti-theists that are transphobes, that are homophobes, that are sexist, that are racist. Remember how many of the like edgy atheist people on YouTube back in like 2016, 2015 ended up being like actual neo-Nazis? Like that doesn't mean that like atheism leads you to be like a Nazi, but it kind of indicates that like being on the far right is not a like thing exclusive to religion. That was kind of a lie that was sold to us when that like movement was being started, when that like new atheist movement was like happening, was that like, you know, these harmful beliefs can't be like replicated in people with like, you know, a secular worldview, because we're so logical and we know like so much about the world and we don't accept all of these dogmatic conclusions. But then they all became Nazis. It's kind of wild, actually. And then they fell into dogmatism. Yeah, exactly. Like that's the other thing too that really bothered me, that kind of pushed me out of the anti-theism like space, right? Is this idea that pits like logic and reason and like rationality against like emotions and feelings and like irrationality, right? Because what it was ultimately like getting to was, it was presuming that logic and like reason were like inherently like a rational thing, and that like feelings and like emotions were an inherently irrational. And so whenever you got into like the idea of like spiritual beliefs, well, those were feelings, those were things you couldn't prove, and so they were irrational. Whereas like rational beliefs would be things using logic and reason. And so what you ended up having come from that was facts don't care about your feelings. And again, that's not to say that these like beliefs are like unique to atheists. They're not. But the fact that they even exist in atheists, or in this case, anti-theists, is kind of proof that like the framework doesn't prevent people from falling into dogmatism and doesn't prevent people from having quote unquote irrational beliefs. The main issue here, right, is what kind of pushed me out of all of this. The reason why like I'm no longer an anti-theist is I just can't reconcile it. I know too many religious people who are genuinely good people. And I mean genuinely good people. So let me tell you a story, okay? And I know this isn't going to convince any of the militant anti-theists in here, but I just want to get this out here, right? So my grandmother and grandfather, my grandfather was a Baptist preacher. I grew up Baptist. Luckily not Southern Baptist, but Baptist with Southern Baptist character. My grandfather was a Baptist preacher. Grandmother is still very religious. Okay? My grandfather is probably the best man I ever knew. And I sincerely mean that, like in every possible way. That man knew no enemies. He only knew friends. He did everything in his power to help every single person he met, regardless of who they were. He was not bigoted. He had no ill feelings towards marginalized groups. To be fair, I don't specifically know what his feelings on trans people would have been because he died before I came out. But I know this for a fact that he would be in support. And regardless of what his original feelings would have been, he would have grown along with them. He was hugely progressive. You know what informed those beliefs? Why he felt the way that he did? Because of his religious belief. Yeah, of course, like it's Christianity. There's a lot of bullshit in Christianity, right? There's a lot of really harmful beliefs within Christianity. The Bible is chock full of really wild. It's actually awful, some of the things that you read. And this is not to dog on anybody who is Christian, by the way. This is my perspective for some of the things that are in that book. But my grandfather didn't care about any of that stuff. As far as he was concerned, it was the good shit that he followed. He only followed two rules. He only followed two rules when it came to his religion. And that was love your neighbor and love God. That's what my grandparents always said to me. And that's what informed them. Because to them, the first one was required for the second one. My grandfather died 15 years ago. My grandmother, still here, still heavily religious. She is one of the biggest supports in my life. Hugely progressive. This woman is the most fierce person I know. And what do you think informs all of this? Her religious belief. What would taking that away do for her? That's what gives her comfort. Going to church every single Sunday, seeing all that warm, fuzzy feeling that she gets from the beliefs that she holds. You know, the belief that one day she'll be reunited. Whether or not that's true, I don't know if it is. But whether or not it's true, keeps her going, keeps her happy, it keeps her hopeful, keeps her moving through. What does taking that away do? What does that do for like thousands, hundreds of thousands of people? As was mentioned in chat earlier, like over 80% of the country is. And of course, that's going to change. Naturally, there's going to be fluctuations and that's going to get higher, it's going to get lower. In fact, I would even say probably we will see more secular people as time goes on. I wouldn't be surprised if that number dwindled and it stopped being such a large majority. And that would be fine. I don't think that's a bad thing. But this idea that like 80% of the country are like irrational people who are just like horrible people because they believe this horrible thing that's going to cause them to do horrible things, I can't sit with that. It's fine if you don't like religion. I don't like religion. I do not have any religious or spiritual beliefs. There are people doing a lot of good out there. This idea that religion doesn't bring any good to the world, it does, personally. And on a macro scale, religion can be a good motivator for people. It can be a good reason to get involved and to fight for things. Not to mention that, like, it's actually good for people's mental health too. Like, that seems to get overlooked by a lot of anti-theists. It's actually good for your mental health. Like, if you believe in that kind of thing, that spirituality, that religion is actually a good thing to hold on to. Like, and I don't have that, obviously, but that's where there are like secular alternatives to that. And it doesn't make the secular alternatives better or more healthy or more reasonable. They're just different. Yeah, when my Ila Divine says, I remember when my son passed away, my faith helped a lot. Like, that is the case for a lot of people. The reason why I wanted to do this was because I kept seeing a lot of really borderline abusive things being said about religious people in response to those. Now, don't get me wrong, I know that a lot of people had some problems with like the framing in Poppy and Zena's argument, and a lot of people had some problems with how a lot of religious people were framing atheists and anti-theists. And I also think that it is unhelpful to just frame like secularism or like non-religious people in like this really weird and like horrible light where like all of us hate religion, because that's not the case. I don't hate religion. I was bitter about religion for a long time because I have a lot of religious trauma, but I don't hate religion. I don't believe in it, but I don't hate it. In fact, I think it is a very good thing for a lot of people. And it can be used in a lot of bad ways, the way that literally anything can. Secular beliefs have been used to cause horrible things too. It's not just an exclusive thing to religion. And framing it like it is in my view, really harmful. And that's not even getting into like the cultural aspects, where like a lot of anti-theists think it is like this moral necessity to get rid of religion, like a society free of religion is a better society. And I'm also sitting here thinking like, so you just want to go into like other cultures and erase their culture. Like you just want to erase a ton of like culture of human existence and expression. That's what it comes down to. Because that's what that does. I know I've been kind of scatterbrained with this. Partially it's the last segment, kind of on my like last bit of energy. Partially because like this stuff relates to a lot of like internal struggles that I've had over the years. So it is a little bit difficult to talk about. Especially because like I was a piece of shit for a long time. And I acted like a piece of shit for a long time to people for being religious. Because of my own trauma and my own like resentment towards that. And that's not every anti-theist, but it's a lot of them. It is a lot of them. And I kind of just want to put that in perspective, because I think some of the discourse around this has been so borked because nobody's able to actually like look at the bigger picture. Because it all got into like the debate over whether God is real, or then it got into the debate over whether religion is good. When like you, it obviously is for some people. Not for everyone. It's not a universal moral good, but it's not a universal moral bad either. So to summarize, because I kind of want to end this segment, I just don't want to participate in grace and look weird for not doing it. That's it. I feel you. The struggle is real, Holic Master. But here's the end of this. Okay, here's to kind of like summarize everything. Why I'm no longer an anti. Why I kind of like take the perspective against the like, moral claims of anti. For one, I reject the notion that religious belief or spiritual belief is inherently irrational or like illogical. I also reject the framework that rationality or like logic is like a virtue to strive for rather than a thing that you do. And that like people who are the most rational or most logical are like more. I reject that. I also can see evidence that anti-theism can lead to just the exact same types of outcomes as religion, just with a secular bent to it, or a more or less a spiteful towards religious beliefs bent. I also reject the notion that religion or spirituality is harmful inherently to people. There are plenty of examples of good things that come out of religion. Objectively good things, religion can provide a lot for a lot of people. It's good for people's mental health, for people who believe in it. I'm not saying that, you should convert to religion because it'll be better for your mental health. That's not what I'm saying. There are secular alternatives. What I am saying is if you have those beliefs, it can be good for your mental health to explore those, hold on to those. And of course, there are obviously bad things about religion. There are obviously negative things that come from it, and things that can be used to do so much harm, and has been used to do so much harm. But there are good things. That's not the entirety of what religion is. I also reject the idea that a world without religion is a better one. It's a different one, to be sure, but as we've already established, the same thought patterns and the same problematic behaviors can come out of irreligious beliefs. Not a better one by default. It's just a different one. And I also think that a lot of the tendencies of anti-theism leads to erasing culture and leads to the, at best, apathy towards other cultures, and at worst, the actual erasure of them, because it does. Would you say that an anti-theist is almost a philosophy that people are trying to turn into a stance or make their ideals into a forced moral? It's definitely a philosophy. I think anti-theism is a philosophy. It's definitely not like a religious stance. It's almost specifically not a religious stance. Like, it's kind of a rejection of, theism is itself like a religious belief. Atheism is the rejection of religion. So, it's not exactly like a religious thing, but it is a moral philosophy and kind of a political philosophy. I wouldn't even say it's like trying to turn it into a political view, because I think it already kind of is one. And yes, I would say that it does kind of go into thought crime territory. If I'm being honest, like the actual implementation of something like that only can go down to thought crime, because you have to at some point, in order for this to be like a thing, it has to be enforced somehow. There is no world, no timeline in which you are convincing every single person to stop being religious. Religions come and go, and some of them die out, and some of them like lose favor and like followings. And of course, that's going to happen over time to all kinds of religions. But like in a world like ours, where we have major religion, and I'm not even talking like they're just like big religions. I'm talking like major socio-political, economic like power. You're not just going to erase that through like convincing people. I guess less through law and more through social stigma and isolation. There's definitely a part of it. Like the idea of like convincing people that they're somehow like bad people to like for being religious does like add to that social stigma. So like here's the thing, and I want to be clear about this. Atheists are a minority in this country. And actually I think in the world too. Atheists are a minority. And so as such, there is actually a lot of political discrimination that goes against atheists. I do not want to overshadow that, by the way. If you disagree with this, you are wrong. Objectively. There is a lot of like ways that atheists have been discriminated against legally through like religious means. And I'm not like discounting that at all. That's obviously like horrible. But I do think there is a tendency among like anti-theists to kind of like reverse that a little bit and like want to push a social stigma on religion. That I think would be my like overall take on like what anti-theism kind of ultimately accomplishes. Is it kind of reverses stigma. Nikki in YouTube chat, a lot of the reinforcement of organized religion I do think is a bad thing. Conservatism and traditionalism is a bad thing. I mean, both of those are true. I do think that a lot of the way that like religion can, consolidate power and can enforce that like social power among people can be used bad. But there are like ways that it can be done good too. Like ultimately what we're talking about is power struggles between, right? When we're talking about religion and we're talking about about the ways that they like influence people, we're talking about power struggles. And that is an inherently like neutral thing. Everyone engages in this. Every group engages in this. It's a matter of like the moral and ethical ways that they engage. And so there's nothing like inherently wrong with like organized religion. The problem is the way that like organized religions tend to consolidate their power and then tend to use that power. Organized religion isn't the problem. It's the way that they're advocating, the way that they're using their power. There are certainly aspects of several religions that violate morality, but there are better ways to work with that than just hating everyone who does. Yeah, that's true. Like there are definitely like I said, there are tons of things like in the Bible that I have like moral objections to, right? That I think are just morally wrong. Obviously, the Bible says like homosexuality is a sin. Kind of, maybe, depending on how you read into it, and depending on the translation and on X thing, right? Because all of it is like, right? But there are tons of little things in there that I also have problems with too. Yeah, being debated nowadays. So like, that's another thing too, is that like a lot of anti-theists will regurgitate like a lot of old talking points that are actually being debated, because like a lot of them are not religious scholars. Some of them are, don't get me wrong, some of them are, but a lot of them are not, and they kind of do like top religious studies and don't actually know a lot of the actual history behind religions. But yeah, like even little things like that are even being debated. But I do think that there are like things in the Bible, at least as it exists, as it's, you know, commonly interpreted, that I would find morally objectionable. But that doesn't mean that the institution itself is necessarily a moral negative. I'm an anarchist myself. I do think the problem is organized religion because it's to develop and reproduce vertical power structures. I mean, yeah, you can argue that, but like even you can argue that because like if your political framework is against like the idea of like a central like authority figure, okay, fine. But that doesn't make it like a moral bad to believe. Like if it's lending to good outcomes, then what's the issue? Would be my kind of, that's kind of my framework here, because like I really actually don't care that much about the actual like structure of religion, because like the difference is kind of meaningless when you get right down to it. Like you have the organized structure of religion, and then you have like disorganized versions of religion that are kind of like based around stuff. But if they have the same outcome, like it doesn't really matter. I can envision like an organized religion that has like a good outcome, even if it does have kind of like a hierarchical structure. And I can imagine disorganized religions. In fact, one can kind of argue that a lot of like major religions nowadays aren't even organized religion in the like strictest sense anymore. Like a lot of Christianity is just really individualistic now. It's not even really that organized. It's really broken down and really fractured and separated. And so, yeah, there's like certain organizational structures that can be made out of that. But there are like, it is becoming way more common for people to just be kind of like vaguely Christian and not have any organizational structure around that. Most Christians I know just say they have a relationship with God and leave it at that. They don't even, and the like, yeah, that's pretty much a lot of them that I know too. I think a lot of the anti-theists, especially those who are queer or atheistic, are embodying the oppression placed upon them by religion, especially religions. I mean, maybe, yeah, kind of, but like my perspective is that I think a lot of anti-theism is reactive, and it's not actually helpful to any like meaningful discourse or any like meaningful structure of society, because I think it just creates worse outcomes. Attacking religion is trying to treat a symptom. It's not like you're not actually going to achieve the goal that you're setting, because you're going after the wrong thing. If you're trying to get rid of harmful beliefs, go after those beliefs. Explain why those are fucked. But you don't have to go through religion, because it's ultimately not religion that like guides those, right? There are like secular transphobes. So like if your problem, say, with like a religion is like, you know, they're like homophobic or transphobic or whatever, you can just go after the homophobia and the transphobia. Because it's not like an exclusive thing to religious people. It's simply going to take time for people to get around to the idea of rehabilitation. What do you mean by rehabilitation? That's what I want to ask. Clarify that. When you say rehabilitation of religion, are you talking about rehabilitation in the way that people talk about like after the revolution, like we have to like hate people? Or are you talking about like people who have like religious trauma? Problem is when people hide behind religion, conservative hate. Yeah, that's true. It's bad when they do that. It's also bad when they do that like without hiding behind religion. I don't really have time to do like a whole chat, Nikki. Like if you, all I want to know is like when you say like the rehabilitation of religion, are you saying like people reclaiming religion? Because your comment is like talking about the F slur, so I assume that you're talking about like reclaiming religion as like a positive thing. But when I see the word rehabilitation, what I have in my mind is like what tankies usually say about like people in the military, which often ends up not being as chill as that lets them seem like it is. Yeah, the gulags. Actually, you know what? You know what, Nikki? I'm feeling spicy tonight. If you would like to call and have a quick chat about this, we can do it. No blood, Holic Master. I told you, conversations, not debates, but let's talk about it. Send me a Discord message. Only joking, but hopefully it's a good convo. I'm sure it will be. Send me a Discord message and we like can set up a chat because I would like to hear this. You have my interest piqued with the word rehabilitation.
Hello?
Hello, hello.
So I just caught like the tail end of your stream and I obviously talking about like the religious stuff, and so you want me to like define more clearly what I mean by like certain phrases and stuff like that.
Yeah, because I've read your comments. Just kind of give me like what your overall like point is.
Right. So at least when I started, like when I grew up, and I do admit that this is a lot of this is coming from ignorance of a shamanistic world. I grew up in America, so when I think of religion, like most of that thought is like just Christianity in and of itself. So, and I feel like a lot of the discourse within that these spaces were based upon like Christianity or some form of what would you call it, like the Judaism, Christianity, and
like the
Islamic,
the like kind of Judeo
Abrahamic
religions. Yeah,
the Abrahamic religions. What I was just getting at is when I say the word rehabilitation, I generally mean that like when religion used to be brought up, it was mainly, especially for like a lot of queer people, it was mainly used as like it was derisive against them, like being. I'll use an example of the F slur. I'm not going to necessarily say it here. I don't know.
Please don't. I do not want my my stream tagged.
Right, no problem. I'm sorry.
You're all good.
So when I was like baby queer, I was myself a little bit uncomfortable with using that term.
Mm-hmm.
As I developed, I got more comfortable using that term as a form of like self-empowerment. Just like reclaiming that word.
The F slur, you mean?
But the F slur.
Okay.
Yeah. But I have a friend who they're a little bit older than I am, and they don't like when I use that word around them because they had a very traumatic experience where they were beaten in public and that word was flung at them, because they were queer.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand the perspective of me wanting to use it because it's empowering, but I also understand that some people are going to be uncomfortable with that word itself. And I feel that this religious topic is something very similar to that. I feel like a lot of anti-theists and like atheists or queer people especially have a lot of internalized anxiety. Towards that kind of stuff. Because when they hear it, they're thinking like, oh, I'm not allowed in certain places, or I'm seeing that as an affront to God and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I would say, especially for me, a lot of this, like when this religious topic came up, like I think a month ago, if not a little bit or longer, it was a little jarring for me, but I have to get over the idea that like me being uncomfortable with with these concepts of rehabilitating religion, like because I don't necessarily get to control how other people conduct themselves, and a lot of if I do attempt to control it, it just reveals a lot of insecurity on my part.
So I guess what I'm hearing is like you're mostly arguing that like a lot of like anti-theists, especially like in the queer circles, where like a lot of us have a lot of religious trauma or have like a lot of kind of like anxieties, even resentments from our time being like either raised or brought into these like religious circles can kind of lead us to this kind of like framework of like anti-theism, and can kind of like, I guess, make it uncomfortable to see people kind of reclaiming religion from the like worst of its like practitioners.
Yeah. And I don't necessarily, like, I'm not trying to stop people from reclaiming that word if they feel like it's something that, they like. Again, I'm like anarchist in that way. It's just going to take a little bit of time for certain people to get around that, because even me myself, I have a lot of personal traumas because of religion. I still, like, my mom to this day will still like use like religion as a vector to abuse me and to like refuse to accept my gender identity, like that.
That's awful that you have to go through with that. I don't actually disagree. I think that like, because the analogy that you made was kind of like with the reclamation of slurs, right? There are a contingent of people who are going to be uncomfortable with that and are going to like not see the value in it. But then like it's going to take them some time to kind of get used to that reclamation.
Yeah, other people using it, exactly.
I don't think I disagree. I think that a lot of like anti-theists do tend to like fall in those circles. I mean, I know that's where I came from. Like you, I also have like trauma from my like upbringing in like religion, being homeschooled and all of that. And like it's obviously taken like a long time for me to kind of move past some of that to kind of see the value. That took like a lot of like, I think, personal work on my end. Not to say that like people who haven't done that are like worse people or anything. I do generally, I think, agree with the idea that like it is going to take a while for a lot of anti-theists to kind of really come around on that. Some of them have. Like I've seen people in chat that, at least I think, describe themselves as anti-theist or like being in that direction, but like also feel like anti-theists generally don't represent their actual overall goals. And so I can definitely see where you're coming from. It is going to take a while for a lot of people to kind of, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we don't try.
Yeah, it's a project for some people. Just like reclaiming the F slur is a project for some people, particularly like younger queer people tend to try to reclaim that word. And it's I don't want to be in a position where I try to use any form of privilege that I have to attempt to control anybody else in that sense. I get a little bit uncomfortable with how a lot of people describe like anti-theists myself, but that's only necessarily because I have an attachment to that word, I guess. Like I project myself onto that like group of people. I don't know.
I think that's valid. I do think that like some of the discourse surrounding anti-theism, particularly in the way that like a lot of religious people view anti-theists, is kind of boring, because like, and I don't know how far into the stream segment like you came, but near the beginning, like I did note that like from my time in being in that circle, from where I like considered myself an anti-theist, I know like a ton of people from that time that are anti-theists that are still currently anti-theists. Like they are some of the best human beings on the planet. Like the idea that like being an anti-theist somehow makes you like a horrible person, or somehow makes you like vindictive, or like you hate everyone who's like religious, or like, treat people poorly. Like I think that framing was really bad, and I can kind of understand some of the defensiveness that a lot of anti-theists would feel with that framing. But then again, like I don't exactly remember what started this discourse, if I'm being honest. So I don't exactly remember like whether that was kind of reactive or proactive kind of thing.
I believe a lot of this discourse was started by Zoe Baker during Twitter. I do want to say that like any discourse that starts from Twitter is necessarily put through algorithms of engagement and should probably be taken less seriously. True. Simply because it's Twitter. It's meant to drive anger and aggression and clicks. It's meant to drive extreme positions. But I feel like a lot of this has just been like people exposing and then pushing back on a lot of the trauma they face with religion, whether they're pro-religion or against religion. I feel like there's potentially like a lot of queer people who felt possibly a little embarrassed to say that they practice their own form of religion in like queer groups, or like secular groups, and they're finally finding an avenue to like push back against that. And a lot of atheistic people are feeling like they're being called out for something they don't necessarily find to be warranted, I guess.
I mean, I can speak to that too, because that was another part of like the reason that I was even interested in this discourse to begin with, because I did see some of the dogpiling on anyone who's like atheist, and like being an atheist myself, like obviously I kind of get defensive with that because we're not all like that.
Right. The term I saw being thrown around everywhere was like Redditor atheist, stuff like that. Like it was almost like people were trying to make atheists a synonym for like bad or like harmful or like, I don't know. Yeah, that's where my perspective comes from. We could potentially talk a little bit more about like how I think organized religion should be like fought back against, but I don't want to take up your entire stream. You said you were nearing the end.
Actually, we don't have to go for like too long, but I actually do kind of want to hear your case on that, because I think we lean in a lot of similar directions, but I think some of our conclusions come a little bit differently. So I do want to hear your perspective on that. Like, when you say that organized religion is something that like should be fought against, kind of, I guess, what do you like, what part of religion, or like, is it the organizational structure, I guess? What part of that do you feel should be like fought against, and why?
Well, I don't necessarily think that this is a property unique to religion in and of itself. I feel like this is a property unique to like civilization, or like the development of civilization. I use that term a little bit derisively. I think that as an anarchist, I think a lot of structural problems come from the development of vertical organizational structure, which is what civilization is predicated upon as like forms of hierarchy. It's not necessarily anything to do with religion in and of itself. It's everything to do with how hierarchy forms. And if you build organized religions, you're going to start creating systems of like oppression.
Okay, so when you say civilization, like you mentioned that like it's a product of like civilization or building civilization. When you say civilization, what exactly are you talking about?
I'm talking about the reproduction of vertical hierarchies as like, okay, so like when people use the term civilized nations, like I don't believe nations themselves should exist. Right, like that's it's hard to like try to describe, especially on the fly.
Oh, good.
A lot of how do I explain this? Like what I mean by like civilization is just like the captured term that a lot of authoritarians use. You know, like if you don't like organized structure where you are being led by a group of people or by a single individual, then you're against civilization in and of itself. So their capture, I use that term because I feel like they've captured it.
Okay, so when you say civilization, you don't like literally mean like society, you just kind of mean like the organizational structure of the state, I guess, like a state structure or state-like structure.
Right, yeah, like there could be like civilizations that structure themselves horizontally, which I'd be in much better favor for. Or like if you had like a personalized religion, I don't think that's necessarily harmful either. A lot of my problem comes with the development of social hierarchies, whereas it's like a lot of that stuff leads to othering and forms of oppression. You can very easily in a town there could be like a predominant religion, and you can very much find yourself, if you don't believe in that religion or don't practice it, being considered an outsider and then therefore treated less so.
I mean, I can see that, but I'm also like, I also don't know how like the elimination of like the organized, like how the elimination of the hierarchy prevents that, because you could still find yourself in like, I can imagine myself this like, you know, society, so to speak, where like, you know, these like top-down structures are kind of like eliminated, sort of like a horizontal. And I can kind of imagine like a scenario where you have like areas of like country or areas of like a city even, where like predominant belief structure is the same way, and you could still end up with like social outcasts, or you could still end up with like social problems between differing groups, even without necessarily the thing leading them.
That is possible. Like the elimination of hierarchy doesn't necessarily eliminate all problems. I just think that the structure, like the force, is much less, is diminished by some. Like if you have a structure versus a something that isn't a structure, you could potentially face a lot more harm from that structure than you would an unorganized one. Does that make sense?
I see where you're coming from, but like I suppose my like, I suppose where I'm getting like hung up on it is like,
Mhm.
I can see the potential happening either way. And so like for me, if the end result is the same, then I don't know what like the point is. So like if we have like a quote unquote organized religion and it
Mhm.
has the same like positive outcome as like a group of people who don't have like an organized religious structure but all kind of vaguely believe the same thing. Like I don't know what the problem in like I don't know what the point in like necessarily fighting against that structure and saying, okay, don't have this structure is going to do if the outcome is the same. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would probably push back on the idea of the outcomes necessarily being the same, but that could be a point of disagreement there. And we can just end it there if you would like.
I mean, yeah, that's fine. Like if you don't want to go into it, I just like I think the overall thing that I'm having with like the organized religion when we're talking about like fighting for or against the concept of org would be that like
Oh.
I care about the outcomes of it, and if the outcomes of like a group of people that have this like organizational structure is good, then I don't know what fighting against that organizational structure, like what benefit we have to that that's unique to not having it.
Well, that it's there could potentially be a lot of good that comes from organizational structure, but that in and of its how do I say this? It also comes with a lot of baggage that I don't necessarily think that we have to carry with it. I think that if we had unorganized structures, they would do a much better job at like dismantling certain or not allowing for certain bad parts of like reproduction to assume, like I would say like conservative values. Like if you have an organized religion, then they are much more likely to have like particular dates of doing things, particular ways of doing things. That's all very conservative in nature. And I don't
know that I would agree that like tradition is inherently like conservative. I think that like tradition and like the kind of structures that can come along with that, like just as progressive as well. Like I see people on like all sides kind of use. I don't think it's necessarily conservative.
Possibly. But again, that could be a topic for another time. I don't want to take up your whole, you said come on quickly. I did. We talked about how I was using the rehabilitation of religion, which I do think that this discourse has been. I think, again, a lot of people have been coming out and saying, hey, I am religious, and I don't want to be afraid to admit that within a secular space, like a lot of queer spaces have been.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, I feel like a lot of anti-theists are getting like whiplash because they didn't realize a lot of this antagonism was even there to begin with. And now they feel like they've done like something wrong to harm friends that they've had and stuff like that. I don't know. Or that they're being harmed,
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree. And for what it's worth, like I appreciate you going on and kind of, being willing to kind of give your take.
Yeah,
I know that it's probably a little bit like nerve wracking too, and not everyone is willing to do that. So I do appreciate you.
Well, I'm mostly fine with that. I do have moments where my brain pauses. I can't necessarily help that, but I've been on streams before. I streamed with Vosh once where I like quote unquote debated him on the whole Hogwarts Legacy thing.
Oh wait, that was you?
I was one of the people that he debated on it.
I thought I recognized your voice, honestly, because I remember I remember watching one of the segments that came from that.
Right, yeah. I was the person that like started crying on stream because a lot of what Vosh was saying like reminded me of like some trauma that my brother.
Yeah, I do remember that segment. Didn't realize I was talking to such a established stream celebrity.
I don't think I'm necessarily an established stream celebrity. I just find myself poking around different communities from time to time, it seems.
I mean, you've been on my clone streams.
Your clone stream?
Yeah, that's the joke in my community. Is that Vosh is my clone.
Oh, okay.
That all of the VCU came from Saige.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I do appreciate you coming. It's been a very like fun conversation, I think.
Yeah. No problem. Might see me around at other places too.
Yeah, and feel free to if you want to like continue this discussion in any way, like feel free to DM me.
Sure. All right, well, have a good one for now.
Yeah, thanks. You too.
Thank you.
Well, that was a decent conversation. I see some comments in YouTube chat. I'm going to read these, but I don't want to stay too long on. This has already been a long segment. So there is, in my opinion, actual fundamental issues make it. I assume you mean impossible for me to integrate it in a progressive world. I mean, you could mean possible, but I'm assuming based on the context, you make it impossible. Boils down to two issues. First, the lack of empiricism, actual reality as basis for moral reasoning and evaluation. Second, that religion serves a primarily emotional service to those believing and participating, which makes it ineffective for. So I disagree with both. For one, I think that on the first point, I think the lack of empiricism / actual reality, I think that like presupposes something, right? It presupposes that there is no empiricism in like the way that people come to their beliefs, because this was part of the why I think that like it presupposes, right, that there is anything like inherently irrational with the thinking patterns that lead us to religion, when in reality like the thinking patterns that lead us to religion are the same types of thinking patterns that lead us to any other. And then on the second point, the idea that like religion primarily serves an emotional service to those participating. Well, for one, that's kind of what most things that we do and believe in kind of provide to us and to each other. The vast majority of things provide like an emotional service, but to say that it only provides an emotional service or even primarily provides one, like I don't even see that as being the case. A lot of like religious institutions do things like for their community. Like there's a reason why like the stereotype is like the church like homeless shelters or like food pantries or like things like that, because a lot of religious institutions provide those. And that's not to say that like those things are exclusive to religion. They're obviously not. And it's not to say that like you couldn't just have a non-religious counterpart to them, but to say that like the fact that like those counterparts exist mean that there's anything like inherently wrong with having them in the first place, or that like we get to kind of erase those contributions in service to the emotional service provided by religion to people, I can't agree with. And also, like, even if religion did only provide an emotional service, what's the harm in that? It doesn't actually, and I want to push back on the idea that makes it ineffective for actual life advice, because there's a lot of like general life advice that comes from religious groups. Like I said, my like grandparents took a lot of like their life advice from their religious beliefs in how they treat people and in how they interact with them. And I wouldn't say that that was like bad for them. It obviously made them good people. I mean it in terms for moral reasoning, so the basis for a moral judgment being so it's an issue, therefore, in the absence of an actual. But you're presupposing that there's no like reasoning that comes into religion, and there very clearly is. Like you can disagree with the conclusions that religion comes to, and you can disagree with the way that reasoning is used, but to say that there's no reasoning involved, like that's like a fallacy. I don't remember the actual like fallacy name, but it is one. Like, because your argument is presupposing the conclusion. I like the opiate of the master, but a lot. That's valid. But yeah, I don't want to stay on this for too long because I don't want this to get borked. This was a good segment because it was very specifically not spicy. So yeah, just to kind of like round things off, why I'm not an anti-theist. I kind of like reject the notion that like religion doesn't provide anything for anyone. I also reject that religion is itself like a moral or ethical problem. And whereas I don't believe in religion, I don't believe that like religious belief is something that is like true or something that I would to follow. It is something that does provide a lot of benefit for people and can potentially provide good on a like larger scale. Whether or not it does is dependent on the people and not dependent on like religion itself as a concept, because if you go down that road, you can go down that road with literally any concept. But anyway, not to relitigate everything, it's been a very long segment. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time. Hi, thanks so much for watching. If you like this video, please consider leaving a like, comment, and subscribing to the channel. And if you want to support the channel further, consider leaving a donation at streamlabs.com/SaigeAlexis/tip, becoming a channel member by clicking the join button, or going to patreon.com/SaigeAlexis and becoming a patron. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.